With crystal chandeliers above and distinguished guests below, the American state dinner is the perfect expression of all things regal. From the white tie to the glittering jewels, fine china, powerful people, herald trumpets, and Viennese waltzes, there is simply nothing like a banquet with the president. But where did this come from, and how did this tradition come to be? Who gets invited? What is the dinner's purpose, and how often do they occur? As always, you've come to the right place. Welcome to Presidential History. The state dinner as we know it has deep roots in the history of diplomacy. While the power of breaking bread together has been known and written about for millennia, world leaders did not really start meeting regularly until the early 19th century. The rise of industrialism and increasing global connections made coordination between world leaders more and more necessary over time, and thus the state dinner was born. Appropriating standards set by Louis XIV at Versailles, guests of honor in the early 19th century would usually be surrounded by less important invitees who would watch but not partake in the meal. This was changed somewhere around 1850. Some examples of early state dinners include the banquet for the King of Lombardy Venetia in 1838 and the state banquet for Queen Victoria at Versailles in 1855. While all of that was going on in Europe, the burgeoning United States continued its own version of the state dinner, holding occasional suppers at the executive mansion honoring cabinet members and other prominent government officials. While not exactly an internationally significant event, they were sometimes much larger than the modern state dinner in scope. As time went on, the dinners became more elaborate and as a consequence far more expensive. Alas, the first real state dinner would not be held for an entire century after the founding of the nation. The first state dinner ever held in the United States was in honor of His Majesty King Kalakaua of the Hawaiian Islands, then called the Sandwich Islands, in 1874. Months after acceding to the throne, His Majesty traveled to the United States to advocate for the ratification of the Reciprocity Treaty, an Americo-Hawaiian agreement centered around the introduction of Hawaiian goods to the U.S. market, in exchange for the U.S. being in control of what would become Pearl Harbor. The crown jewel of the King's 3-month American tour was a formal dinner held at the White House in his honor. At the banqueting table, President Grant and the King rubbed elbows with the Vice President, Chief Justice, Speaker of the House, and various European aristocrats. All in all, it was quite the invite list. But the patricians and their patron were not the only remarkable things at the supper. Determined to wow their guests, President and Mrs. Grant arranged for a 587-piece set of hand-painted Limoges china to be used. In case you're wondering, the set's price was a lofty $3,000. Adjusted for inflation, that's about $80,000, or $136 apiece. Clearly, Miss Grant's high society upbringing had influenced her expensive taste. But once again, it didn't stop there. The White House staff served no less than 30 courses during the meal. That's a lot of dishes to wash, hand-painted or not. The press went wild after hearing of the dinner, publishing long articles detailing every aspect and commissioning full-page illustrative recreations of the event. The public was entranced with the story, as America's fascination with all things royal is well documented. Alas, the United States would not host another state dinner for over half a century. After many years, the second state dinner was held in the United States. In 1931, President Herbert Hoover hosted another monarch, this time King, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that, of Thailand. There were many events on the royal schedule and the press went nuts. The social effect and public captivation shown by this event made the president and the U.S. government finally realize the power of state dinners and their three-pronged effect. First, the grand spectacle humbles the guest, giving the president the upper hand in negotiations that usually occur the next day. Second, the dinner captivates the public and increases the president's standing amongst the populace. And third, it shows the power and prestige of the United States, and thus the foundations for the traditional state dinner were laid. The post-war period saw the solidification of standard practice and tradition for state dinners. As the amount of state dinners exploded during the Eisenhower and Kennedy years, customs naturally formed. Decorative and culinary decisions fell under the purview of the First Lady, as the president's wife is traditionally the White House hostess. The dress code was set as white tie, the standard for all formal dinners going all the way back to the outfit's beginnings in President Washington's time. Meals became a four-course standard with dessert and coffee at the end of the evening, and entertainment usually followed. Altogether, it was starting to feel like state dinners had always existed in the United States, serving to showcase the finest of American food and culture. As with all events, 100% of the original traditions never make it into the next era. After the peak of the 1950s and early 60s, informality started sneaking its way into the White House, slowly chipping away at the austere and regal qualities that set the state dinner apart from all other American suppers. Examples of such erosion include the change of dress code from white tie to black tie, the alteration of seating arrangements from a traditional banquet table to cheap and uncomfortable round tables, and the degradation of quality in evening entertainment, which traded the foremost classical musicians and opera singers for less dignified purveyors of popular music. Most of this occurred during the later years of the Kennedy administration, and while the Kennedys and Johnson's early state dinners were filled with tradition and custom, later dinners were characterized by an emergence of informality, jazz, and celebrity invites. But there was a brief renaissance during the Nixon and Ford administrations where tradition saw a comeback. It seems the combination of slightly older and more conservative presidents led to tradition gaining a foothold once more. During this time, the powerful and prestigious were invited back to the White House for some supremely civilized suppers. Such guests included the Shah of Persia, Emperor of Japan, and the Queen of England. But alas, this phenomenon was short-lived. Upon the election of Jimmy Carter, the informal customs established by the Kennedys and Johnsons were brought back and set in stone. And while there have been some dinners since then that signal a return to the old ways, it's clear that despite the differences between the modern state dinner and its 19th century origins, it still has an important place in the American diplomatic playbook, no matter what color tie the host and guests are wearing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time here on Presidential History.